I want to thank everybody for journeying downtown a little bit, and I just want to kind of get right into it. So, everybody is here because they're looking for something, whether it's for themselves or for folks on their caseload. There's this large gaping hole surrounding long-term housing for people with developmental disabilities, and I want you to walk away from today not only having an idea of what things could look like, but being excited about the options that are available. So a little bit about background about myself. I grew up here in Fort Wayne. I originally went to school. I thought I was going to teach for a while and then be a pastor, and I learned very quickly that loving kids and teaching kids are two very different things, and I would not do well in the classroom. And learned that church politics and I did not get along very well. So did my master's in human services and also did a certificate program in not-for-profit management. My wife and I then moved into a residential community for adults with developmental disabilities called Share Foundation for the Handicapped in LaPorte as part of my master's internship program. And the time there changed our lives. And so you lived on site, you worked on site. We moved in with Ron and Gary, and these two guys, we talk about them every day, and we've been away for over 5 years. And left there after about 4 months and kind of bounced around between Fort Wayne and Chicagoland area, and ended up working for Bethesda for 3.5 years. I worked in the waiver homes for 2 years, and then was a program manager for a year and a half. During that year and a half time, I worked with 45 families. And I worked with guys with severe autism that were nonverbal with extreme violent behaviors, and all the way to guys that lived on their own. They drove, they had jobs, and one guy had a kid. And so a wide range of folks. But everyone has this question of what's going to happen to my child when I can no longer take care of them or when I die. The first option that I think most people look at is getting their own apartment. But the issue with that is that's not practical for a lot of people. It's, of the 45 families that I worked with, only about 20% of the folks actually had the skill sets to live independently, safely. And so then the next thing was moving into a group home or a waiver home. Now, or the parents have to now turn 80 or pass away, or there must be significant behavioral or medical issues for someone to get that funding to move in a home. But even for the folks that did have that funding, they didn't like the homes. And so even with that being an option available for some folks, it wasn't desirable. And then the next I heard a lot was to move in with a family member. The issue with that is what happens if that family member, brother or sister, doesn't have that deep connection with their sibling. Also, do they need to move away? I had a number of families that said, their child's going to have to move to Florida or Texas or California. And yes, that may address the safety issue, but just kind of taking people out of their communities, is that really the best option? Then there are other residential communities like Share Foundation, but there's not a whole lot. A lot of times they are rural, isolated communities that they really only fit a certain demographic of people. They can be really, really hard to get into. And most residential programs that I looked into cost around $3,500 a month. And there's a program down in Bloomington, it's $82,000 a year. And a lot of families that I work with don't have that kind of money for, maybe for a year, but it's not a long-term solution. And I think the most difficult piece was many families told me that their child was just going to live with them, and that they hoped that they outlived their child, that they hoped that their child died before they did, because that way they did not have to, they would know where their child is. And that absolutely broke my heart. And so something new had to be created, right? And you've got to address the primary concerns of the parents. You've got to be able to give choice to the people themselves. You've got to be able to support the caregivers in a new way. And you've got to build on the already established social networks. You know, a lot of what the homes are is this random placement based off of budgets. And you've got people that they grew up together, they went to high school together, they did Special Olympics or Bible studies. So how do we keep these friend networks in place? And then for the people that don't have those, how do we help build, you know, friendships where it's not this random placement? And that's where CASS Housing came from. So the mission of CASS Housing is to create and maintain customizable, affordable, sustainable, and safe living arrangements for adults with intellectual or developmental disabilities that promote independent living skills. There's a lot to that mission statement, and we'll kind of break down pieces of that. There's two very key terms that we're going to be looking at and using. The first is core member. And a core member, that term is taken from an organization called l'Arche, and I contacted l'Arche about using this term, and they said it's fine. This was their explanation of that term. The term core member was originally coined by l'Arche, an international federation of people with and without intellectual disabilities who share, live, and work together in community. It comes from the Latin word for heart, and refers to members who have intellectual disabilities and form the heart of the community. So those are the core members. The stewards, that is the term that is taken from Share Foundation, the place I did my internship at. And this is from them. We wanted a name for our caregivers that truly described their role. We decided that since practicing good stewardship meant taking good care of treasure that was entrusted to us, steward was the perfect name, since what greater treasure do we have than the lives of our precious villagers? Those are the residents. There are a couple overarching things that need to be addressed before kind of moving forward. And the first is that CASS is a non-competitive business to all current waiver providers. We do not use any waiver funding for CASS Housing, which means we're not in competition with Bethesda, AWS, ARC. We're not touching any of the waiver dollars, all right? Another piece is that CASS will own all of the homes, and there's two primary reasons for this. The first is there are significant financial benefits. One is, as a 501c3, not-for-profit, we don't pay property tax, so there's a savings there. For any kind of items that we would purchase in the home, we're not paying sales tax, so that's a 7% increase or a savings. Additionally, if your family's furnace goes out or your roof needs to be replaced, you can't go to your roofer and be like, "Hey, can I get a new roof for free?" But as a not-for-profit, we can build relationships with local contractors, local businesses, to whether we can get things at a decreased cost or at their price, as opposed to what anybody else can kind of have access to. But then also there are significant social safeguards, and there's two pieces to this. One is, and I saw this in the residential program, where a lot of times a family would own a home and then they would rent out, their child would live in the home and they would rent out to like 2 other friends or something like that. In every single situation I saw, there was always a conflict between their child and the other 2 housemates. And what happened was that the parent that owned the home simply just did not renew the lease, and the other 2 people were kicked out of the home. Additionally, one of the first home that I worked in was owned by a property management company. They sold it to another property management company, and that have with severe autism, that are more or less nonverbal. They've lived in this home for 4 years, and now they're being kicked out, right? And so you have to have a unbiased third party holding the property to kind of decrease conflict of interest. We'll talk a little bit about what if a family has already purchased the property and all that, so we'll get into that a little bit. So the first model that we're looking at is the independent living model, and this is for folks that are already living on their own or could live on their own. That just need, that there's generally just a few things that are kind of holding them back. We're going to be looking at multifamily unit or homes, so like a triplex, quad, maybe something a little bit bigger. So completely separate spaces. There would be 3 core members in one of these homes, and then 1 steward that is living on site. This group of people, the 2 primary issues are safety and affordability. And so your affordable options are Section 8 and mobile home parks. But even if, like one of my guys lives in a really nice part of town, he befriended a guy in his apartment complex, the guy came over and he stole a book of checks, right? And so just because someone is paying more money doesn't mean that it's a safer location. So the role of the steward is very much of a safe neighbor. The steward in the independent living model, they're not working shifts. They are in some ways on call, but on call just as again, as a good neighbor, right? I would not call my neighbor in the middle of the night just to hang out, but if I fell, if there was an emergency, you know, I could call for assistance. Likewise, a lot of these folks may be able to drive or have their own cars. You know, if their car would break down, would I take my neighbor to work one day? Sure. I'm not going to take them for 6 months, but the idea that everyone can kind of they can manage day-to-day life. One of the sheets that I passed out is a situational test for the independent living homes. The situational tests are just some items for families to go over of what if, you know, how can you manage your money and things like that. Can you cook your favorite meals? There is no single item on that list that is like a deal breaker, right? But what it would do is it gives families an idea of, are there certain areas that need to be worked on? Is that where we utilize waiver staff, you know, where if they've got staff with ARC, where, you know, maybe they can do all of life, but cooking is a major concern. So, you know, utilize the waiver staff to go grocery shopping and to cook foods and things like that. So, so that's really the independent living model. The cost for this is $300 per month plus 1/3 the cost of the steward's utilities, and so it's a split of the steward's utilities. The compensation for the steward in this model is free cost of living, so their unit would be paid for and their utilities are paid for. They can have outside employment. It's again in this model, it's really that safe point of contact. That's the primary focus. So the next is a little bit of a video. I'm a huge IKEA fan. Anybody IKEA? No? All right, IKEA, great. So this is, yes, it's a small space. The Swedes are kind of crazy, but this is just kind of a picture of what a space could look like. It doesn't have to be a small 1-bedroom. I talked with one family that there are 2 guys that are best friends that they want to live together. Okay, so we'll go buy a 2-bedroom place, or we'll you know, kind of combine units or something like that. So the big thing is that CASS isn't providing a model to say your child has to fit in this, has to fit within this. The idea is that we're going to create something together that fits the needs of your child, right? And their own interest, right? It's not just this collaboration between CASS and the parents, but what do the kids want? What kids, they're my age. What can we build together? So then the next model is the family living model, and this is for people that they could live independently, but they desire to live more in a family style living household, or for folks that need more of daily support. That, you know, living independently really isn't an option. And the whole premise of the family living model is to keep those social networks together, where, you know, friends that, when I would meet with families and they say, you know, you always hear these names come up because they've done bowling together, or they've done Bible study together or something. So who are these people that have those, that the parents know each other, the parents trust each other, where the parents raise the kids in a similar fashion. You know, in the independent living model, it's not as necessary for the folks to know each other. We would certainly kind of spend some time if there are people that don't know each other. But like in an apartment setting, you don't necessarily know all the people that you're living next to. But in a home, you know everybody, right? And so there may be, we may need to take some time where there may be 2 core members that know each other, but they don't know a third, right? So we need to take 6 months or a year to kind of introduce folks to see, is this a good fit? Does everyone kind of have the same interests and backgrounds and things like that? The fee for this is 90% of their Social Security or disability income. It's something that I'm working with the board of directors on. That may be too high, but the program fee covers all of their living expenses. It covers their rent, utilities, food, transportation, household maintenance, all of those pieces. We may be decreasing that. We'll be getting into like individual budgets here in a little bit. So the waiver, the waiver doesn't pay for the steward at all. And the steward in this model, they get a salary where, you know, the primary function of the steward in the independent living model is that safe neighbor. The primary function in the family living model is much more like a stay-at-home parent, where they're not, they don't need outside employment. They're able to kind of do this together as a family. And we utilize waiver hours and natural supports and volunteers to create other respite opportunities. So right now, as families, you know, your kids go out. They go out with staff members. They may do day program, one-on-one time. They may have a behavioral consultant, rec and music therapy. We're not using any of that money, so all of those pieces still stay in place. And so part of the admissions process is we would sit down with all the families and put 3 schedules together. Where's everybody going? Where, what are they? Do they have employment out in the community? You know, where is everybody? You know, just like with a family, the kids are going to school. They've got after-school practice, things like that. So the steward is much more acting as a. They are not a parent, but that is the closest role that we could kind of find of helping kind of direct what's going on inside the household. And then there's the Family Plus model, and the Family Plus model is for folks that need 24/7 support. And so these would be, it was very important to me to kind of create something that could be done for the people in current waiver homes. So in the Family Plus model, every single person needs to have the larger waiver. This could already be an established waiver home, or it could be 3 families that, you know, have the funding for the ability to move into a waiver home. And what the steward's primary role is, that we're not changing any of the staffing patterns. There's still overnight staff. You know, the function of the waiver home still operates the same way. The difference is now you have a steward living on site. I always imagine, for, you know, the families that are familiar with the waiver homes, imagine the home and then just put a second story on top of it or something like that, where the steward is living on site. That is now a person chosen by the families, chosen by the core members, that is an advocate for the core members, because one of the primary issues with waiver homes is you've got this carousel of staff coming in and out, right? That's never going to change. State reimbursement levels are not going to be doubled or anything like that. You're never going to be able to change that carousel of staff, right? But what you can do is have someone live on site that is that advocate, where, you know, if my wife and I and girls are living in a home and we come downstairs and the staff they've got their feet up and not doing anything, what are you doing? Get out of my house. And so the steward is acting much more like a house manager of a single home, as opposed to, again, in the family living model, a stay-at-home parent or a good neighbor, right? And so they are directing the staff, and they're helping out with training and things like that, but they're not necessarily doing a lot of one-on-one support. They very well may, but I wanted to create something that addressed the waiver home issue, right? Where you could take the CASS model and overlay it onto all the waiver group homes today and not cost families any additional money. And so everyone, the question is, how do you pay for this thing? And it's a great question. So what we're going to do is look at a couple different budgets. So if you open up your packet, there's 3 budgets on the left-hand side. And the first is it's the back one, the core members family living budget. And so what we would do is there's the independent living model and the family living model. And what we would do is sit down with every single family and create a budget. So the independent living model, they would pay approximately $350 a month between their rent and covering part of the steward's fee, and then just creating a basic family budget. Where's their money going, and how is it coming in? Do they have employment? Is this a sustainable position? Does the family need to step in and cover some of their expenses? You know, we would sit down and through that process, or through the admissions process, and see, is this a viable position? The next slide, or the next on the back of that, is the budget of a core member in a family living model. And so you're going to have 2 columns, one that says the parent's home and one that says with CASS. And so in this example, you know, we are taking some of the, you know, we're covering the expenses of rent and utilities and things like that. What CASS isn't covering is a lot of the fun activities, right? We're not paying for them to go on vacation. We're not paying for basketball, things like that. We have to go through and see where's their money going? What are they spending it on? And in this example, I wanted to show one where this is actually one of our people's budgets. He would be spending more than what he is bringing in. So he brings in $1,156 a month via Social Security. He'd pay $1,050 as a program fee, and there's a deficit of, I think, $270 a month. He leads a very active lifestyle. And so in that circumstance, either there would have to be a change of his activity level, or the family would need to step in to cover some of those expenses, or there'd be a trust fund that would be in place to help cover some of those expenses. So just as any of us that have a change of life, you know, if I moved to Chicago without a significant increase in income, what I am able to do changes, right? So we're not asking, I don't want to take people's money, right? I don't want to just take 100% of their money, or like I said, there's a number of residential programs. It's $3,500 a month, right? Like that's not covering shoes or anything like that. So I want people to have the money to be able to do some of the things that they love, but at some point also, how do you run a business? And so that's one thing that we're working with the board on, of what is an appropriate amount. So right now it's 90%. The next is a household budget, and so what this is a picture of, it's just a simple family budget. So if right now the steward's going to be making $18,000 a year, we'll get into how that looks. But what are the regular expenses that a household has? Setting aside money for food and transportation, gasoline, insurance, all these different things. So one of the big things for me is I want there to be complete financial transparency for families to see where's the money going, right? It's right here. This is we're paying for home maintenance and car upkeep and things like that. A person doesn't need to have an accounting degree to create a family budget and to execute a family budget. We're going to be getting into kind of the different revenue sources, but I am a big fan of dollar-a-day donors, and the reason for that is anybody can donate $1 a day. Even people on minimum wage can donate $1 a day. The deficit for so there's two income levels. Usually the families that I worked with were either at like $730 a month or like $1,150 a month if they were paying or if they're pulling from their parents' Social Security. So it's 90% of those two items. If a family, if the core member has a income of $730 a month, it takes 23 donors at $1 a day to support that person, the deficit that person incurs. For someone that's pulling off of their parent's Social Security, so if a parent is disabled, if a parent has passed away, or if a parent is retired, they can pull from their parent's Social Security. So that's where the larger dollar amount comes from. What's interesting is every core member moves down over time, right? Every single parent's going to age or pass away. So, someone may come into a CASS program and start at 23 donors where I have to direct the money to support, this person or this house. But over time, it's going to cost less. And so the question of how much does it take to sustain a home? Well, if you have two people on Social Security, so that's 20, 10 apiece, so that's 20, and one person at the larger amount, that's 23. So I need 43 donors at $1 a day to support that house, right? So you just use those numbers to see how many donors have to be allocated for the sustainability of that home. Where is the money coming from? All right, so there's 5 revenue sources. The first is individual donors at $1 a day. If someone wants to donate more than that, great. But what I want is to create this broad base of donors. I don't want to continually rely on the Joneses for a $10,000 a year donation, and then that money's gone, right? Something happens and they take the money away. So instead of relying on that $10,000 a year donation, I would count them as one donor. Right? If they're over $360, $365 a year, that counts as one donor. If people give more than that, it expedites the process. We're able to get more people into homes. We're able to get more property. This is a really, really key piece. There was a number of families that I talked to that had already purchased property or had money set aside to purchase a home. And the question was, so do you just expect us to give you our house? And I really didn't have an answer to that. What we will do is, if a family has the ability to contribute to the purchase of a home, it is not required. If they have the ability to contribute to the purchase of a home, that money is earmarked so that if their child moves away from CASS housing for whatever reason, if they leave the program, that money is returned to the family over a given amount of time. So the example is, if we're looking at a $150,000 property and family A donates $50,000, family B donates $30,000, and family C donates $0. Instead of needing to fundraise $150,000, I already have a base of $80,000, and now I only need to fundraise $70,000. And we would draw up a contract that, the two families that have donated money, that money would be returned. That's not our money. That's the family's money. And that's really, really important to me, because if CASS isn't the solution, the families still have to have the funds to create something else, right? If I can get the money quicker to the family, phenomenal. But don't have the ability to write a $50,000 check back to a family the next day kind of thing. If a family already owns a property, what we would do is I think I said this earlier, one of the big things is that we would go house hunting together. It's not that CASS already has purchased homes where, if a family grew up in the Carroll School District, stay in Carroll. It doesn't make sense to take people that grew up in Northwest Allen County and move them to New Haven, right? It's not where their churches are. That's not where their families are. That's not where their favorite restaurants are, right? So if people want to stay in a given area, I'll do that, right? I talked with one family, and the mom wants to be a steward in a rural community, and the daughter wants to live downtown. Great, right? So it's a question of what are the needs and the interests of the people, right? I've talked to some families that say, my child's not going to live downtown. I have other families that say, I can't wait to live downtown. That's me. So it's just a question of where are people comfortable with? It's keep folks in the communities that they want to stay in, just as any of us choose where we want to live within reason. I mean, you can't buy a home, significant, $1.5 million home just for the heck of it, right? But if you have families that are willing to come together and purchase that home, great, right? But coming back to the donor agreement, that's really, really important to me, is that this is the family's money. I don't want CASS to, yes, we need to use that money to purchase or renovate a home, but I want that money to stay with the family. There's different grants through foundations. We're working with a number of places right now that are very, very interested in seeing CASS get up off the ground. We right now have our 501c3 status pending with the IRS. We should hear back within the next 60 days. Foundations have said, we really can't talk to you until we have that, and so within the next 60 days we should be able to pursue a lot of different grants. There's a number of business donations, whether that's outright cash donations or let's say there's a business that wants to pay for the renovations of a kitchen, right? We've got a partners page on the website. Here's, we can show what businesses are, what they've contributed, how. And it's not just this this unknown thing, is we can show pictures, is, the trades group did this, and this is what it looked like before, and this is what it looks like now, and how it's being used. And the last piece is the program fee. And so the program fee covers up to 97% of a household's budget. So the independent living home, those are essentially small income generators. They're essentially small revenue generators, where if you have 3 core members, $300 a piece, it's a mortgage-free income. We're making $900 a month off that home. That money helps offset the costs of the family living home. So then coming back to the stewards, it's really important that the stewards aren't random people. I will never have an apply here on the website, right? The stewards need to have a connection with the core members, whether that's a former volunteer, whether it's a former staff member, whether it's a family member. I don't want these people, there's got to be a vested interest. I'm not going to send random people in. It could be somebody who's single, it could be a couple, somebody with kids. Again, it's a question of, does this work with the family? And so a lot of these places, a lot of the residential communities don't allow children on site. But the thing is if you have a single person, like, you've got to be able to follow somebody through all the steps of life. And so if you have a single person that meets their spouse, but you can't be a married person, then you lose this phenomenal staff member, because they're not going to choose their job over their future spouse, right? So they've got the spouse has to be able to be absorbed into the home if everyone's on board with it, right? Or if you've got a couple, and my wife and I, we've got 2 girls, there may be a home that we all live together. Great, there's no issue. We want to live in the family living home. But let's say we have a 3rd child, and one of the guys that we live with doesn't do well with babies. Okay? That's okay. Like, that's a step, that's a place where we may need to find another home or find something else because that doesn't meet the needs of the people in the home, right? But you've got to be able to adapt to the needs of the caregivers, of the stewards. And if you don't, you're going to lose really great people. And so, you know, let's say we're in a 4-bedroom home and, you know, there's a child's born. Okay, so what do other families do? They either add on to their house or they buy new property. You know, okay, let's do that. And there's this conversations of people that are interested in the steward position. There's one common phrase that kind of keeps on coming up, and that is, I couldn't imagine a better life, right? And it's really a very similar conversation around a stay-at-home parent. When you talk to some parents, they say, you could never pay me enough to be a stay-at-home parent, right? I need to work outside the house. I need to do things. And there are other parents, other, you know, moms and dads, that's the best thing that they could imagine. They couldn't, you know, and so, but you can't convince somebody to want to be a stay-at-home parent. It's either in them or it's not, right? And so when I talk with people and there's, you know, they come up with a lot of, well, what about this, what about that? And there's asking questions to kind of gain more information, but then there's the, well, I don't want to lose my freedom. Well, as a parent, you lose freedoms, right? I've lost a lot of freedoms over the year from, you know, a college kid that if I want to go travel the U.S. right now, I can't do that. That doesn't mean that I'm less happy than what I was I'm more happy, but I have lost some freedoms. But that's one thing that kind of the term or the phrase, I couldn't imagine a better life, just keeps on coming up over and over again. There's one very big piece of legislation that was passed in 2015. So there's a labor law that was passed that has very, very specific rules regarding live-in caregivers and their definition between an independent contractor and employer, and they now fall under minimum wage requirements, right? This is a very big deal in regards to the family living home. So next slide. That did not turn out. So there are 168 hours in a given week, all right? The labor law states that you're able to subtract sleeping time if the caregiver is not working during that time. So we subtract 56 hours. So there's 112 awake hours in a week that need to be accounted for. What we would do, this kind of goes back to that, creating the master schedule of the house. What we would do is see where everyone is going throughout the week. Are they going to day program? Are they going out to volunteer? Are they spending time with their parents or other volunteers? So the number I came up with is that everyone would be out of the house for 20 hours a week where the steward does not need to be around. Another piece is the labor law states that they recognize that there's a very fine line between working and kind of having a personal life within a home. Where like we moved in with my grandmother a year and a half ago, and you know, our working time is time that we're helping with dishes or taking grandma to church or you know, doing laundry, things like that. But if grandma's just sitting in her room watching TV, that's not really working time, right? So a lot of the folks that are living in the family living model, they may not need someone around 24/7, right? It's not that the steward's out of the home, it's just that they're not working. Example, if the three guys want to be watching a movie together, if the steward is not needed during that time, that's not working. If the steward is watching the movie because they want to, that's not working. If the three guys are playing a board game and one of the guys needs the steward there to help move the pieces around or whatever, that's working, right? So the number I came up with for this example is 4 hours a day the stewards are not needed for working time. So that means that there are 64 hours in a week that they need to be paid. So minimum wage in Indiana is $7.25. There's 24 hours of overtime. So the required monthly compensation is $23.87 a month, and so then the yearly compensation is a little over $28,000 a year. What CASS is going to do is we will pay stewards the first $18,000 a year, right? We are also able to subtract the fair market value of their housing costs, and so a portion of what would be rent, their food. We could even get into utilities and possibly their use of the car, but we don't need to go that far yet. So CASS would pay the first $18,000 a year, so that's $1,500 a month. We subtract the fair market value of the home, or the housing and other benefits. So in this example, CASS, or the compensation for the steward, is $20,053 a month. That is less than what they need to be required to pay. So in this example, we are at a deficit of $334 a month, which means between 3 families in this example, the families would need to pay each $111 a month. Now, there are different ways around that. Are the people going out into the community more, right? So if they are out of the house for 25 hours a week instead of 20, if they are not needed if they're not working more on a daily basis, that decreases this. Another option would be if families, like if you've got 3 families, and on Wednesdays one of the families comes over to stay with the guys, and you create a respite opportunity for the steward, that decreases it, right? And so every 3 weeks the families come in, and it's not a weekly requirement, or it's not you're not leaning on just one family to do it every single week, but that's a way to decrease hours. And so the magic number is if stewards work 57 hours a week or less, there's no additional fee to the families. So it's 111 hours that you have to come up with between sleeping and time away from the home. But 57 is the magic number, that there's no additional cost to families in the family living model. That one took a while to come up with. So the steps to take, where are we at, or like if a family is interested in this, every single core member needs to have one of the waivers and also a source of income, so disability or Social Security income. I don't want to solely base, let's say someone did have the waiver but they didn't have Social Security or disability, which I think that they've changed that, but let's say if somebody had a job, I don't want to just base somebody's income off of a job, because jobs change all the time. So what would be the backup plan if somebody's job situation changed? So first, everyone has the waiver or a source of income. The next is the establishment of a home group, right? So who are the 3 families that want to stay together? It's possible to do 2. The money gets a little bit trickier. You could have 4 people, and that actually solves all of the money issues. The issue with 4 people, and this is from my experience in the homes, 4 people is a lot of people. It can work, but it'd have to be kind of a unique situation. But so everyone's got the waiver and the source of income. The family group has been selected, or the home group's been established, and then a steward is nominated. And so I want the families to bring someone forward of who would be interested in doing something like this. Now, you may have 2 families may not know somebody, but there's always somebody. There's always somebody, that a former staff member, a cousin, somebody from church that has this heart for people with disabilities, right? Who are those people, right? Bring them and let's sit down as a group. And then we go through the admissions process where, just as my house is different from your house, which is different from your house, there may be similarities between the 3, but ultimately there are 3 different homes, right? Every single person in this home has a different home. So But if you've been in a waiver home or a group home, it's the same house. It doesn't matter what house you go to, they're all the same homes. CASS isn't coming in to say, this is what things have to look like. What we're saying is there's 150 different items that we need to sit down and consider. Because, you know, if you've got two guys that play basketball at Turnstone, the families aren't necessarily talking about their thoughts on gun regulation, right? So what CASS is really acting as a consultant of helping families guide through all these different issues. Let's talk about all these different things. Are there any deal breakers that a family would say absolutely not, or you know, different idiosyncrasies that we need to be made aware of? But yeah, the household rules and expectations are going to be a very big piece of it. And then we go house hunting, you know, and the thing is you can't rush that process, right? One thing that we'll get into is that it's not a quick fix. A long-term housing solution can't be a quick fix. Where if you've got a group of folks that want to stay southwest Fort Wayne, we may need to wait 6 months, or we may need to wait for a year for the right home to come on the market, right? Or we need to wait until CASS has fundraised enough to go buy the home, right? And that's where the donor agreement comes in, where families, if there's a home on the market and this is the home that everybody wants, families could contribute more. We safeguard that money, but then we buy the property up, right? And so CASS really serves in 4 key functions, key areas. Is we are a consultant to help families guide through all of these different areas. We provide training and support to the stewards. Being a caregiver is difficult, right? And so having a third party kind of being that that reference point and that support system, you know, families could choose to do this on their own. You could have 3 families come together and buy a house and operate this, but there's no support network for the stewards in that situation. We provide affordable housing, really kind of staying away from the landlord kind of conversation, but you know, there's a lot of folks that, you know, a 1-bedroom apartment in Fort Wayne, $550, $600 a month, right? We're able to offer it at $300 a month and a portion of Social Security or disability income. And the last is there's a lot of families that don't have the money to purchase a home, or they don't have the money to go on trips or things like that. As a not-for-profit, we're able to fundraise on behalf of families. We're able to go to foundations and build those relationships, where there are some families that do have more money than other families. And so CASS is kind of that middleman to help to bring the money together and kind of how do we build something for everybody. And it's only been within the last 2 months or so that I've really talked about what CASS isn't, right? It's a lot of what CASS is. But CASS isn't a drop-off service, right? CASS, you just drop off your kid and see at Christmas kind of thing. We want to keep families together. We want to keep families, while everyone's healthy, go travel. You want to go to Texas for a month, go to Texas. It doesn't make sense. I worked with one guy that was kicked out of a waiver program because he was spending too much time with his aunt. Now, as a program manager, yes, that caused issues because you create master schedules based off of, you know, what you think people are going to be in the homes and everything. But he wanted to spend more time with his aunt. He shouldn't be penalized because he loved his family, kind of thing. It's not a quick fix. You know, if someone needs an answer tomorrow, this isn't it, right? You may have a person that the parents have quickly passed away or something like that. I'm not going to throw somebody into home just because there's this immediate need, right? Let's take a year. Let's try to figure something out. You got to take our breath, because if you rush into something, all you're going to do is you're going to create a situation that doesn't work, and you're going to be repeating the cycle in 3 or 6 months, and it's going to be worse off than what it was if we wouldn't have just taken our time to make something. And it's not a massive organization. I don't want CASS to be kind of this ivory tower in Fort Wayne where, you know, as new sites are developed, I've had folks in 5 different states already reach out to ask for me to come out and replicate this. Let me get a first house first. But what we're looking at in terms of growth is there would be like CASS would be in Fort Wayne. But at some point you cut off the growth because the people in Kendallville are different from the people in Auburn, which are different from the people in New Haven, which are different than the people from Southwest, right? Which are different from the people in South Bend and Indianapolis and West Lafayette. And so you could have a single name, recognizable name in an area, but at some point geographically you cut it off, and then what CASS would do is start a new organization, new board of directors, new executive director. We may partner, we may be part of the CASS network, but ultimately you've got to create different places because different organizations because the needs of the people change depending on the areas, right? So where are we at now? Like I said, we're a pending 501c3. Once we get that, things kind of take off. I'm actively meeting with families. At this point, I've met with 9 different families that have expressed an interest in the next 12 months. I expect that number to grow quickly. And so it's kind of, right now, to be honest, people have asked about a wait list. Right now, we don't have a wait list because it's this race to the first home group selection, right? I've got a couple families that know like 2 of the 3, but they don't have that 3rd person quite yet. I'm networking with anyone that is interested in having this discussion. It's where now you all become a advocate for me, because if I call a building company, they get asked for things all the time, right? But if you go to your church, you go to your electrician, you go to your CPA or your lawyer, and you say, listen to this guy, just take an hour or whatever, you build credibility for me, right? And that's actually been the primary role of our board so far. We're in the middle of a bunch of grants. There's a international contest being held by Autism Speaks right now that I think that we've got a good shot at possibly 2 of the 3 contests. And as I said, there's been national interest so far, which has been, it shows how many millions of people nationwide this is an issue with. This isn't just, you know, a handful of families. Just in Northeast Indiana alone, you have tens of thousands of people that need a long-term housing solution. So how can you help is, like I said, connect me with people that are interested in this, right? People right now, as we've really got kind of the structure of the organization down, now we're entering into more of this marketing stage, and we're going to be entering into a home buying and home renovation stage. We're going to need tradespeople. We may be looking at a home that's move-in ready, or we may be looking at a gut job that, you know, obviously we're going to need more hands on deck at that point. Interior designers, I don't do that well. And so, you know, who has an interest in creating spaces where, you know, we'll go to, you know, an IKEA or something and create a space for the core members. If you can keep an eye out for different grants and eligible or contests that we may, that's actually how I learned about the Autism Speaks contest, is that a family that I worked with said, hey, can you look into this? So if there are any revenue sources that I could be tapping into, if you could direct them my way. One of the sheets that I gave you was a volunteer option, or different areas. We're going to be utilizing volunteers in a very unique way, where if you have, what we're trying to do is build relationships off of common interests, right? Do you garden? Well, what of our core members gardens? If they have an interest in music or technology, what are they going to, bowling, whatever. Building relationships off of those common interests, where I'm not asking volunteers to be all things to all peoples. What do you like to do? I have a board member that said she likes to gamble. Great. go play penny slots with somebody for the day. if that's a common interest, you know. So if you have an interest in helping, there is a spot. If you like to cook, if you like, if you're a nurse, if you're whatever your skill sets are in, we can utilize, we can build those relationships. And so if you have an interest as things start to develop, you know, and then also like to tie into like the independent living home, are there folks that have different interests in the trades, right? One of our board members was a bricklayer, right? So is there somebody that is looking for long-term employment that we could build a trade off of that, or somebody that's a professional chef or a retired chef that, you know, they could come over once a week to work on cooking skills to help get them a job at a restaurant or something like that. So if you have a heart for this, there's a spot to help, right? Whether it's with your child or with somebody else. Get the word out on social media and your friends. Like this is all word of mouth. There's a number of folks I've never met before today, right? So somehow or another, you got word of it. You tell people, you know, your friends that you see at Turnstone or your program manager at ARC or AWS. That's the whole nature of a grassroots thing. I'm not going to put an ad in the newspaper or something like that. It's because the word of mouth is so much more powerful than just an ad for a product kind of thing. And the last stage is to donate. Right now, until we get 501c3, we're not taking donations. I mean, if you want to, that's fine. It's still a tax write-off, but I'm not looking for $500,000. I need dollar-a-day donors, and that provides the foundation toward, you know, as we move forward. So if you are interested in seeing this get up off the ground, at some point we need money for homes, and that's where it's going to come from. All right, well, I want to thank everybody for coming out, and I'll be around for a little bit, but you can give me a call, email me, and we'll be in touch. Thanks.